Some viewers may find this content disturbing. Viewer discretion is advised. Who dares awaken me from my long-deserved slumber? The Wendigo Guy, Ryan Tremblay. Yes, it is always excellent to see you sneak into the fox den. I hope everyone is ready to figure out some distinguishable differences between the Dogman and the Skinwalker. Yet I am very weak. Much better. Being fully recharged and ready to take on the Dogman is a much needed and deserved relishment. Without further ado, it is time for myself and the Wendigo Guy to take a walk into the darkness. Welcome back, my creatures of the night. Here we are with another episode of Midnight Lycanthropy. And guess what? We have somebody that's a legendary cryptozoologist with us tonight. Yes, Ryan Tremblay from Let the Monsters In. How you doing tonight, friend?
I'm doing great, and that was an awesome introduction. Thanks for that, brother. I appreciate that.
Yes. So tonight, I really want to sit down and pick your mind and have you talk about skinwalkers and maybe some of your experiences and just your whole knowledge about the topic. As you know, I'm a Dogman guy, and so do my followers, but I definitely think it's important to try to get out some of the differentials of what's occurring.
Oh, I definitely agree with you, man. I think that Dogman and Skinwalkers are something that's too tied together. I don't think a lot of people do the actual research and look into the Navajo lore to get to know what a Skinwalker really is.
No, I agree with you on that topic. And for the most part, from what I understand, I feel werewolves would be more, of the shapeshifter, the skinwalker. And I believe in the past, when people would use the term werewolf, it falls into that category. Yet the dogman, as you said, I feel is a completely separate entity and falls potentially, in my eyes, more into the cynocephaly type genre than the actual werewolf aspect.
I would agree with you on that, but the thing is, though, with werewolves, though, like I don't think we should put werewolves and the Skinwalkers in the same category. And there's kind of a reason for that because with werewolves, the most common thing you hear is it's a curse or it's like an infection of sorts, where they get bitten or scratched. Skinwalkers aren't like that.
Interesting. Okay. Could you elaborate on that for us?
Absolutely. So when you look at the Skinwalkers, the Yinagroshi, right? Or as some people pronounce it, Yinaradushi, it's a shaman. It's a witch doctor that he or she chooses to become a skinwalker by donning the pelts of certain animals, most notably predatory animals like coyotes, wolves, or even bears in some cases. But, they don't ever get bitten by said animal, so it's not like it's a curse directly. It's one of those things they chose themselves. So really, when we're seeing like, humans turn into bipedal werewolves, that's not what the skinwalkers do. The the skinwalkers actually become the actual animal themselves.
Okay. So, for example, if it was to become a wolf, it would just be a large quadrupedal wolf, not an enormous bipedal monster, more or less.
Correct. And to actually kind of affirm that, you have to look at the name. When you look at the Navajo name for them, when you translate it into English, it means by means of it, on all fours he goes. So there's the clue
Mm,
for you. It says on all fours he goes. Okay. So it's not talking about an animal that walks upright. They're saying literally all fours. So there you go. There's the indicator that they become that animal.
that's great because from the understandings of the general consensus of the public that does dive into this topic, I do think there's a big blockage of what people are understanding between, as I just mentioned, the skinwalker, the dogman, werewolves, etc. Where
Mhm.
would you, I guess, then place, for example, like when people are seeing, Bearzilla, Coyote Man, Dogman, all the different, baboon, Klickitat, ape cat. Would you think those are potential skinwalkers that are taking form at all, or do you think that is just a complete separate entity that's occurring?
Based on what I know, what I've learned from Navajo people here in Arizona, I'd say it's a completely different entity. Because everyone I've spoken to, they say they don't become bipedal, they don't walk upright like a man, they're walking on all fours. So if somebody's seeing like, those big bear creatures that are walking upright, that's definitely not a skinwalker.
Yes, 100%, especially if, as you were just saying, it's literally saying in the translation, meaning on all fours. All
Hmm.
right, this is good. This is good. Would you like to dive into some more? I mean, that's already some great stuff right there.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, I'm always game to dive into this stuff and drop some knowledge on there, I mean, because it's such a confused topic, Kenny. I see people calling them aliens or, placing them in the same category as Dogman or even Bigfoot in some extreme cases. This is actually an argument I had with somebody. They were saying that Sasquatch and the Skinwalkers are one and the same, and I'm going, well, no, no, they're not. I mean, in order to become a Bigfoot, it would have to actually a Bigfoot and don that pelt, so it wouldn't make any sense.
And that falls again into the misconception. And that's excellent, and that's why I really feel that talking to you in general, and also a reason I become good friends with you, is because I like that mindset, and I actually like how you try to attack the topic as I do with a journalist aspect, and just really trying to dive into the facts. In the future as well, we'll definitely have to get you back on here with some more of the topics we're talking about, because in the time frame we have tonight, we're definitely not going to be able to cover all that. I definitely couldn't agree more, because there's the information that's put out there, people are deliberately embellishing to try and curve their narrative.
Yes, and for the most part, they're ignoring the Navajo lore. And for me, that's like the worst mistake anyone can make, because the Yanadushi, the Yanagroshi, it started with the Navajo, the Dene people, okay? And I believe it should stick with those people. So if we're going to tell stories of the Yanagroshi and Skinwalkers, we have to look at their oral traditions, all the lore and the mythology they have behind them. We can't just, go ahead and translate it into whatever we want it to be and turn it into the rake or pale crawlers. We have to stick very much to their beliefs.
Yes, which is so much not what we do. I mean, that just is like logical sense. Wait, aren't we supposed to be going to TikTok here to get our historical aspects? I mean, I thought that's what the big curve right now is. Literally, like you just said, if you're going to document something and say it's a historical document or a historical movie or historical series, anything, you really need to follow what it's about. For example, a little off topic, but it just validates what you said, a history book. I mean, we
Hmm.
look at the history books, for example, here that we were given, that is an American historical view on a point. But if we were to be in another country and read some of their historical aspects, is documented differently. We all know history is documented by the victor. So it's going to have their narrative on it.
Right.
So it's actually not necessarily going to be truthful unless you're following how it was documented by those individuals.
That's exactly right. And, I like the way you think, Kenny. I really do. I mean, you want to stick to what was actually said, not the made up stuff that we see on TikTok or Instagram or even Twitter in some cases. We have to dig deep and look into the actual history. And with the Yanagroshi, the Skinwalkers, there's actual historical evidence of these guys. The 1878 Navajo witch purge. I mean, that right there, that's historical proof that these Skinwalkers were amongst us at one point in time.
That's so creepy, and especially the fact that they're speaking of that. And in elderly cultures, like I always try to make this point with people when they are like, well, people are all about hoaxing. Sure, today, yes, people can get some clout. Let's rewind to Alexander the Great or Herodotus for a second, but let's
Mm,
focus on Alexander the Great. What is this man who is trying to conquer, right? I mean, let's be real. Isn't that what Greece and the Romans were about as cultures? Conquer, conquer, conquer. And
absolutely.
yes, he basically wanted to be a god. So wait a second. This man's going to take time to say that he's interacted and battled with and against the cynocephali. For what purpose was this? Like, what purpose for this man to waste basically his breath to even say something along the lines of that? And also, why would Herodotus speak about that? Why would they document that at this point in time? Almost everything they documented is verifiable by other cultures for the most part, meaning that they didn't
Mhm.
waste their time with folklore. And I'm pretty sure back then, if you were trying to write some sort of Brothers Grimm type thing, they probably would have laughed at you, you know?
Well, yeah, they might have viewed you as a heretic too, because you got to remember back in those days, if you talked about magical stuff or if you wrote about magical stuff, you weren't met with all the welcome arms that you are today. Like these days, it's popularized. People love it. Back in those days, it was considered sorcery and witchcraft. So would leaders want to talk about this stuff knowing to get persecuted for it? No.
Again, with the validation, when I look, it's not that I discredit anything newer age. There's plenty of credible people. So I'm not
Yeah.
saying a new age encounter isn't credible. But yet, as you just stated, back then people had a lot more to lose in regards of the taboo aspect. I actually talked to my little brother who's not really he's a skeptic, but he's also an open skeptic. He used to watch Monster Quest with me growing up, and so he's very
Right.
open minded. He's a sewer septic engineer specialist, so he's smart, but he just has a different track mind. We were talking about, I gave him an example. Back in France, 15-year-old boy goes missing. They send out an archer with some peasants to try to find this boy. According to the archer and the peasants, they find the boy badly mauled and mutilated. He had just been deceased because he was twitching still. As they approached the brush, two enormous wolves that were jet black and supposedly had glowing eyes blew past the archer and knocked him over and scattered the peasants. So now, okay,
Wow.
this man's yeah, so he's gonna go back to the village now, right? And
Mhm.
tell them, wait, we didn't get the 15-year-old boy back. And I saw two enormous wolves with glowing eyes that barreled us all over. I'm pretty sure you're not getting gold for any of that. And as you said, you're probably going to be the village idiot now.
Or even worse, I mean, hello, the werewolf trials. Those were
Yes.
a thing. So I mean, if you went back and said, "Hey, I didn't get the little boy, but this is what I saw," chances are the villagers are going to look at you and be like, "Yeah, you didn't get the little boy because you literally got that little boy. You're the werewolf that killed him." So they have to be really careful telling stories like this back in those days.
Again, validates those more in my eyes because they had way more at stake. I mean,
Oh
this day and
yeah,
age, you can hide behind things. And like you said, people welcome it. There's TV shows about the
right.
unknown cryptids.
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, when you look at the skinwalkers or even the Wendigo Kenny, these things were so feared by the people, they didn't even want to say the names. So talking about them way back in those days, it wasn't like it would be welcome. It wouldn't be like people were like, oh, tell me more. No, people would be terrified. So, you have to look at those old historical accounts because usually there's something to them. Like with the Wendigo, especially, Swift Runner is one of the cases I will find the most fascinating ever. I mean, that story is so damn dark and disturbing, bro. It's like, wow.
I don't know if I'm familiar with that. If you'd like to dive into that a little bit.
Okay, so Swift Runner, he was a Cree fur trader up in Canada. He used to reside at Fort Saskatchewan. Okay, this took place in 1878, the winter of 1878. He took his family, his wife, his three kids, and his mother-in-law to the hunting cabin that he always used to frequent. Okay, and he came back to Fort Saskatchewan 3 weeks later, and he's talking about how he was starving. He was going hungry. There was nothing to eat. There was no game to be found. But the people he was telling the story to, Kenny, they were looking at him going, well, you don't look unhealthy. You don't look unfed. In fact, you look like you've gained weight. So as he started drinking with his friends, he started becoming more and more loose lipped, okay? And he started telling stories of how he cannibalized his family. And when they asked him, why would you do that? He told them, because I am Wendigo. So they arrested him, and the magistrates actually took him back to the cabin where he was staying with his family. And when they arrived, Kenny, it was one of the most grisly sights they had ever seen. There was handprints smeared across the trees and on the walls of the cabin that was filled with blood and the fat from his family members. They saw the femur bones laying on the ground all over the place where he had cracked them open. He had sucked out the marrow from the femurs, okay? And he would walk over to the skulls and very casually and very nonchalantly, he would stick his fingers through the eye sockets and he'd waggle them at the magistrates and go, oh, well, this was my wife. This was my mother-in-law. And on those skulls, you could actually see where he had cracked the skulls open to get to the brains. And so they brought him back to jail at Fort Saskatchewan, and he was even tormenting one of the guards. One of the guards that was staying there, he was a short, kind of stout fellow, so he had some weight on him. Every time Swift Runner saw him, he would look at him. He'd hold up 3 fingers, Kenny, and he'd be like, you have this much fat on your bones. So he was kind of conveying he wanted to eat that guard as well.
Ooh.
Talk about disturbing, huh? But he maintained his story, though. He was talking to the French Jesuits, the French priests, and he kept telling them, I am Wendigo. I am Wendigo. I am Wendigo. So there was something to that story, Kenny.
That's just pure nightmare fuel right there. And it's very interesting you mentioned that, because a little bit off topic again, I was watching something earlier because I like to learn about Neanderthals and some of the behaviors that they displayed, with literally what you were saying about the cracking of the bones and like the sucking of the marrow. They had found those human bones of other Neanderthals and other tribes that these other tribes had done that to, and then thrown them in with the other game animals they had eaten.
Right.
The thought of that is mind-boggling, because back then it would have been, I don't know if I would say normal, but it would have been a survival technique and normal to some tribes, and now that's looked upon as extremely taboo. And then that story you tell right there literally falls into the behaviors of just the casual, you know, how picking up the skulls, well, just kind of like with the Neanderthals, the casual cracking open of the torso. And just lost for words to think of the word to describe that.
It's disturbing. I mean, you know, when we think of eating another human being, you know, we're sitting there going, oh my God, that's gross. No, absolutely not. But yeah, like you said, though, man, back in like Neanderthal days, you know, this was common. This is what they did to survive. But with Swift Runner, he was a fur trader. He was a hunter, you know, so he knew how to track and hunt down any kind of animal he could find. So he didn't do it, though. He skipped over that step, and rather than hunting animals, he ate his own family. So it's like, my God.
Something happened, like you said, some sort of switch went off or something.
Well, this is
Possessed
where
him,
it gets
yeah.
interesting. This is where it gets really interesting, Kenny. So when you look into the story of Swift Runner, you're going to find a couple of different stories about his personality, right? Some people will say he was kind of a jerk, kind of standoffish, and he didn't like people. But then when you look at actual stories from within that Fort Saskatchewan, they tell stories of how he was a kind, gentle, loving man, where his family was like his prize, where he adored his family. So you look at that, right? Then you pair it up with stories that he was telling before the event. He was having nightmares about the Wendigo, Kenny. And in the Algonquin Creek Ojibwe belief, if you're having nightmares about a Wendigo, that's one way to become Wendigo. So this poor guy was having these nightmares that he was going to become this man-eating monster, and sure enough,
He
he
did.
did become that man-eating monster.
Whew. Yeah, that's, as you've spoken about more and more of this, yeah, that definitely falls way more into the line of, that's what I try to explain to people when they potentially talking about like any sort of entity or being that can portal hop. I feel, as you were just talking about, those type of entities and that type of behavior is definitely not, in my eyes, predominant dogman behavior by any means. A dogman is still what I've documented. They're smart, obviously, but they're not even close to on the level for intellect, I believe, as a skinwalker. And I don't know, I think skinwalkers can still have that malicious aspect of humanity where at the end of the day, a dogman could still be outsmarted, meaning you put down a piece of steak, it still comes. I mean, I'll give you an example. Raccoons, right? They're super smart, but sometimes people need to relocate them and they'll catch them, and their buddy will watch their other buddy just get caught and do the same thing. But yet,
Yeah,
yes,
that's
because
true.
they love the marshmallow and cat food. Yet I've seen other raccoons help their buddies out of traps before, and they know how to like open doors for like 30 days. Like, they're not dumb.
No.
So Yeah, so I do believe a dogman is smart, but I don't think it has the full rationality aspect of what you were saying with like a skinwalker. I think,
So,
yeah.
would you think they have a above average animal intelligence? Is that what you're saying?
Yes, they're just as, I mean, they can set traps, and I think they could probably outsmart the average person that's not familiar with their aspects out in the woods, just like any predator could. Yet, as you said, I mean, how do I word this? Like a serial for the most part, so
Mhm.
terrible, but they're usually smarter than the general public, and they're
Oh yeah.
usually,
Well, that's why they say that there's a very thin line between genius and psychopath.
yes, like Einstein, exactly, thin line,
Mhm.
like between genius and out of his mind. And
Yep.
it usually takes other people within like special organizations like the or whatever to be able to match that type of intellect, be just as smart. And sometimes they never catch them, and other times they do.
Right.
Yes, so I think now when you add that type of intellect, where you have somebody with like a Dahmer type mentality that's already psychotic, but then now can take on like a form of something that amplifies their physical capabilities. That's a whole nother level of, in my eyes, terrifying than just a. Don't get me wrong, a dog man is scary, but at the end of the day, a dog man, I don't think, could pick up a cell phone and use it. Whereas I bet you a skinwalker can still be very much entwined to do more human type things to terrorize you.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, there's a reason why they're so feared, Kenny. I mean, people have to remember that the Yanagroshi, the skinwalkers, they are humans and they've been practicing their craft for a very long time. So they know certain ways to get to people. They know how to torment people, how to screw with them and really drive them to the point of almost insanity. They know how to scare you so you're witless pretty much.
It's like a form of witchcraft, correct?
Yes,
Or
yes.
so that's another prime example. Yes. So a witch, again, is obviously still a human, but now they have some sort of magical power, which would make them more dangerous than an average animal, for example. Or if you take a giant wolf, right? Yes, it's still scary and menacing, but now if you take a menacing human that would be borderline genius, that's psychotic, and now you put them into that entity, that's a whole nother level of screwed up. So meaning
Oh,
if
absolutely.
the skinwalker say did take on the form of dogman, right? And went
Mhm.
head to head with the dogman, I would put my money on the skinwalker.
Oh, absolutely. Because they would know how to make weapons. They'd know what to do with like magic and whatnot, and what kind of spells to
Yes,
put down.
yes, exactly. A whole nother level of intellect.
And I think what people need to recognize too is that with like the Yanagroshi, the skinwalkers, they have to learn both the good magic and the bad magic. So they know how to do these magical things that we don't know how to do. So they can cast these dark spells that will really just screw with us in any way possible. So it's not something I would want to face one on one. I'd just be like, yeah, no, don't bother me. So
Yeah, any sort of physical entity. I mean, not that, don't get me wrong, a great white shark or a tiger or a dog, man, is still just absolutely mortifying coming at you, but at least it's there in front of you. But when you start talking about things that have capabilities of, disappearing or taking on different shapes and passing through walls, that's a whole nother level of, as I said, nightmare view.
absolutely, absolutely. I mean, I spoke to someone actually who her family actually tangled up with a skinwalker, and it didn't go on for just a few days, Kenny. It went on for like 2 or 3 generations. So when they set their sights on you, man, it's not just you they're going to go after. It's pretty much 5 generations of bad medicine, and it's just like, oh my God.
That's actually terrifying that you said that because Nuxium believes he's potentially dealing with some sort of skinwalker up in the area, a Cascade Lake that's been terrorizing him and it's been
Oh,
like urinating on his car. And basically, he said it sounded like a really pissed off Scooby Doo outside of his cabin, like banging on his cabin. And he lives up in the Sierra Nevada forest range, so he's in a pretty remote spot.
oh
Yeah,
wow.
yeah. So he's ever since he tracked that though, it's now for pushing almost a year that it's been coming back and always pretty much consistently screwing with him. And it seemed to all fall once he found the footprints and then he tracked it and it saw
Oh,
him and he saw it, yet it moved on and he stopped, gave it its space, but continued to follow it. And being a master tracker, he obviously knew that it saw him and it was obviously aware he was there if he's aware of it. And he said he tracked pretty much right to a front of a cave, which is where
wow.
he thinks it's living. And ever since then, yeah, he's been being tormented by it, but his behaviors aren't very dogmanish. Like, again, every case I've covered, when a dogman comes back, like one of the Brenton Solomon cases I heard about, where when the guy shot at it when he was on his porch that night, when it came back, it just ripped the front door off and came and got his ass. If the LBL massacre did occur, it ripped off the RV and went and got them. So that's what I'm saying. Like, the dogman would just bust down your window and you're gone, whereas the skinwalker knows it can do that, but it's just screwing with Nuxium. It knows it can, like,
Yeah,
obviously dispose of him at any point in time, but I don't think that's the purpose. I think it just literally wants to give them nightmares.
yeah. I mean, they seem to be more like mischief and really mind screwing than doing direct physical harm. But that isn't to say that at one point it won't try physical harm with him, though. I mean, if I were him, what I would do is I'd really, really research the history of that area and see if maybe he could narrow down who this thing could be. Because the Dene, the Navajo people, they say that the best way to defeat one is to learn their real name. It takes away their power.
Interesting. Yeah, you and him should definitely speak sometime as well. Correct me if I'm wrong here, because I would like you to elaborate on this. There was a group of people in California, there's some forest up there, that they went lost and they ended up cannibalizing each other.
The Donner
And
Party.
there we go. Yes,
There you go.
yes.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, there you go. There's another case of cannibalism right there. And I always do wonder, I didn't think this before, but ever since I got into the Wendigo studies these past couple of years, I have to wonder if maybe when somebody does cannibalism out in the wild like that, if maybe it's the Wendigo entity taking hold.
That's why I wanted to bring that up, is because that's, again, kind of, he had been there before, and then now all this is kind of unfolding around him. And like you said, that's like another taboo area where he and his ancestors don't really like to go there, and they all warn him that if he goes there, you need to make sure you're protecting yourself properly. And
Mm-hmm.
it's also something that they don't really like to speak about. I mean, he spoke about it enough to me to educate me about it. And I mean, I've read about it. But as you said again at the beginning about that person that is just always talking about those things,
Mm-hmm.
it's not something Nuxium would just sit down and just speak about with anybody. He talks about it with us because, as I said, we're trying to help, and we're also trying to figure out what's occurring.
Right, right. They don't like to give credit to it because they do believe that once you start acknowledging it, it's going to start acknowledging you. And, that's something I'm careful of too, Kenny. I mean, even though I'm not, of tribal blood, I'm still very careful knowing that I'm studying these things. So I have to take precautions to not get recognized by these things.
That's a whole nother level of scary. Nuxia mentioned that to me about with the dog man. He's like, make sure you take care of yourself. And I actually responded, I'm like, well, I am only really dealing with the dog man. People such as, yourself and what you were just saying with the skinwalkers and Wendigo. I could definitely see that, but I feel the dog man, there's no way he knows I'm researching him unless I'm outside and he makes eye contact, correct?
I would agree with you on that. I mean, I don't think that Dogman's going to be that big of a threat if you're looking into them. I mean, I think that's more like something demonic. Anything supernatural, you have to be very careful when you acknowledge that.
Which
And
is something I steer away from, yes.
right. And for some people that's probably best because I know people that start studying the supernatural and they get too carried away with it. So you do have to have that fine line where you will not cross that line and you know where to stop when you're researching stuff.
That's actually so excellent. Well, before we wrap this up here, I wanted to ask you, now that we had just mentioned about that as well, I covered a case recently in Maine where this guy, let's use the term, genius here, decided he was going to go into a cemetery later at night
Uh,
and, just starts like chanting some strange chants that he had found throughout text online and also some older
oh,
texts in general. Because he wanted to amplify his potential chance of a supernatural paranormal experience. Whatever, go ahead, toot your own horn. But as he's doing this, he claims he notices it starts to go dead silent. Yeah, it doesn't surprise me. And then he starts to find enormous canine tracks all around the area, which I don't know if they were there previous or now because of what he just did, this is
mhm.
occurring. And then he claims he heard loud growling. And as he looked off deeper into the cemetery around some foggyish area, a large bipedal wolf stood up with glowing eyes and darted towards him. He ran towards his car, got into his car, and ever since then, he claimed that he's had all kinds of misfortune. Him and his wife actually, unfortunately, had a miscarriage. Just all kinds of like
Oh,
things that I don't know if it's coincidental or just the fact that he's got bad luck in life. But after he did all that, he claims all these dominoes happened.
Well, if you wanted my impression on that, Kenny, I don't think there's anything as coincidental. I don't think when you practice anything supernatural or magical that bad luck is coincidental. I think it's something you bring upon yourself. I mean, if you don't know what you're chanting, what words you're using, or what incantations you're putting out there, then you need to be super, super careful with that because you could be invoking the dark art, the dark magics. And it's only natural if you invoke this stuff, it's going to affect your life. And as for that canine thing that he saw, I wonder, was it maybe something like the Ulanga Dogala, the spirit with the knife teeth?
Yeah, see, that's why I wanted to bring that up to you because that has got me kind of scratching my head a little bit, thinking that when these people are going into the grave sites and doing some of the activities he is, or being disrespectful, and they're seeing those type of entities,
Mm-hmm.
or in like the Mark Twain forest where it resembles like a hellhound, werewolf, etc. Is it what
Right.
you just said and not the actual physical dog man that gets half of its pectoral muscle blown off by a shotgun at point blank, screams, spits out blood, and runs away, you know?
Yeah, I lean more towards maybe some kind of a manifestation. I mean, when you're practicing stuff like that, Kenny, people have to really know what they're doing. Okay. That's why people spend years upon years upon years knowing what chants to do, what kind of magical spells to put out there. Because if you don't know what you're doing, I mean, who's to say you're not summoning something up from another dimension or whatever? And who's to say it's not evil? You know what I'm saying? I mean, we don't know. So in his case, I think what he did was actually kind of stupid.
Kind of. I mean,
Yeah, I
as
mean,
this
beyond
guy's
kind of,
telling
I
me
was
this
trying to be
story,
nice, but
oh man, as he's telling it to me, I mean, I'm documenting it, but I'm just sitting here just like shaking my head inside more and more as he's speaking more and more words, just like,
yeah, there's certain
but
places you don't want to try to use any kind of magic there, Kenny. And number one would be a graveyard or a cemetery. I mean, that's where the dead are laid to rest, and that has such tremendous energy anyway. Okay, but you don't want to turn that energy negative. It's just why would you even try that?
a lack of intellect and just like I said, the mindset of humans. We just sometimes want to know the answer so much. It's good to know answers, but it's also smart to know the answers about things. I mean, like the guy
So,
that told me the other day, he saw a wounded dog man under his porch. Him and his buddy decided they wanted to track it for a half mile in the middle of the night. Can't find it, but hear like it's around him. My
oh,
response in my head is, okay, it's real smart to track any sort of apex predator or predator that's wounded in the night. And now let's go out there with your little handheld gun and a flashlight and try to track what you think is a wounded dog man. Okay.
oh man, yeah, people got to learn logic, bro. They really do. I mean, there's things you just do not do, and that's another one of them right there. I mean,
Yes, like we want answers, but just be smart. And like the woman the other day, she takes the picture of this amazing den. I'll send it to you after we wrap this up, but it's all this broken down brush, and on the inside of it, it looks like it digs down deep into the ground. Great picture, but I'm thinking to myself, lady, were you by yourself when you approached this unknown den that leads into the ground? Or even if you weren't, like, why
yeah,
did the people near you allow you to do that? Great
right.
picture, but please don't do that again.
Getting close to an animal's den, that's just a bad idea in general. But when it's like Bigfoot or Dogman, oh no, come
Yeah,
on,
she's just
man.
asking. Yes. Thank you so much for popping on tonight and giving
My
us some of
pleasure.
your time because, I know you're a super busy dude and I value your opinion in general. And as I stated before, you're definitely one of my top three cryptozoologists. So
Oh,
anytime I
thank you,
have,
brother.
yeah, anytime I have questions about, Dogman, obviously I still try to throw it your way. But
Mhm.
anytime people approach me about things I'm uneducated on, I try to toss them your way too. So.
I definitely appreciate the heck out of you, man.
No, right back at you. I'd like to, when you get some more time, let me know and we'll get you back on
Absolutely.
here.
Anytime, just let me know, and I will be here with bells on.
Cool. All right,
All
man.
right,
Well,
brother.
thanks for everything. I appreciate you.
Likewise, bro.
All right, you have a great night, man.
You too. Bye bye.
Thank you for everyone who once again stopped by the Fox Den tonight for another episode of Star Fox Radio. If you do enjoy my content, please like, subscribe, and share it. Feed the algorithm. And until the next episode of Midnight Lycanthropy, stay safe out there.